Good morning, everyone. We're going to give you guys a couple of more minutes to just sign in, and then we'll get started. There. Technology is slow getting everybody in. All right. I'm sure others will start joining, but because it's 8:01 and I know everybody's got busy days, and so do we, and we've got lots to cover. So good morning. Welcome to our third session of Coronavirus Confusion Abounds webinar series. This one is dedicated to avoiding the hot seat, AKA we're trying to keep you out of trouble. So we welcome all of you here. Just a few housekeeping tips. First of all, those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Janet Hurley. I'm going to be the moderator today, and I will also speak. My co-presenters, my cohorts in crime, Shelley Brandstetter is with Facility Services at TASB, and then Joni Arrett is with the Risk Management Services. I've had the pleasure of knowing both of these young ladies for multiple years. They've all known me when I had longer hair and it was brown. Couple of things. If you're not familiar with Zoom, couple of things down at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little bar, and you should be able to see where it's got an area for chat. You should be able to go there and type your questions. If it's really important, I don't know if we've got the raise hand function, but you can also probably do that for us as well. Any handouts, anything we think relevant, unless it's something of major importance and we can throw it in the chat pod, we will do that, but we will get you links at the end when we send you the email with the link to the recording and a quick follow-up survey letting us know if we did something good or if we did something bad. Y'all, we always need to know what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. And then save the date. We are going to be doing our next one on December the 10th. It will be again at the same time, and we're going to be talking about vacant buildings, what you might need to know before you shut down for a couple of weeks, things that you might need to keep in mind, especially thinking about the pandemic and everything else. So with that being said, I'm going to switch into our presentation. And this is how it's going to roll. Joni's going to cover the petroleum storage tanks and HazCom. Yeah, we're going to beat HazCom into you, like it or not, but we're hoping you can share this information with somebody else. Then we'll roll into integrated pest management, where we'll talk a little bit about licensing. And then Shelley will wrap up with asbestos. And then when we have time, we'll answer questions submitted through registration or through chat. And I kind of anticipate you might have questions, especially about licensing. So we can either address it when we get there or when we get to the end, depending on what the issue is. All right.
Okay.
Joni.
All right. So let's rock and roll. Thank you, Janet. Appreciate everybody being here. So this isn't meant to be a deep dive on these topics. This is hitting some important points that you need to be aware of. Again, we want you to stay out of the principal's office. I spend way too much time there and I don't recommend it. So petroleum storage tanks, when it comes to understanding your tanks, I always kind of envision a flow chart. Start with one, do I have tanks? You'll be surprised how many school districts, and a lot of it has to do with turnover, erratic record keeping, or just chaotic transition within the administration. A lot of folks don't know if they have fuel storage tanks. So find out, do we have fuel storage tanks? It may not be visible like in this picture where it's right in front of you. Yes, we have an above ground storage tank. It might be underground, so you won't be able to see it. But it's not uncommon over the years for us to find out a school district has a fuel tank by looking in the state's registration database and finding out, nope, we still have one here, at least on the books. So do I have a fuel tank? Number two, kind of going down the thought process, is it above ground or underground? Because it matters. Rules apply individually, whether it's above ground or underground. And then the next question is, what is the volume? Because volume also matters. Depending on how much you have of a certain substance or a combination of substances might trigger additional requirements. So just kind of a general starting point so you can kind of wrap your head around all the requirements. There's not, a 5-day class wouldn't cover fuel tank requirements. So we're not going there. This is making sure when you get visited by a regulatory agency, you have an idea of where your district stands. Next slide. So like I mentioned, it depends on what you have. And I know y'all get tired of us responding with that. Well, what are we supposed to do about this? Well, it depends, but that's the truth. So like with registration applies to both underground and above ground. However, above ground, you have to have a certain volume. So it depends. Financial assurance, and that's how it's listed in the regulations, but it's essentially insurance, applies definitely to underground. And this is tied to your registration with the state. Financial assurance for above ground is optional, so it depends. But these are questions that the state will be asking you when you submit your annual registration if you're required to register. Notifications for construction and installation, this applies to both above ground and underground. However, there's some exclusions when maybe you have staff that conduct basic preventive maintenance, which is recommended. So you don't have to notify the state, or you don't have to use contractors for all types of work, but you do have to use contractors that have been properly vetted, as well as notify the state for larger activities, installation, removal, cleaning out of the tanks, major upgrades in equipment, those sorts of things. As far as contractors go, I mean, they're only as good as what they know. So it's important that you understand your contractors may not be on the up and up when it comes to regulations, because new ones are actually coming out in the very near future that apply to underground storage tanks. You have a responsibility to make sure that you're using contractors that are very knowledgeable and are providing you with all the best options based on your situation. And if you're not sure on the registration status, their permit status, you can always reach out to us. We can double check that stuff in the TCEQ database. Record keeping is important because when an inspection happens, that's exactly what they're going to be asking. They have a very long checklist that they're going to be using during the inspection, and we'll definitely provide that as a handout. But they're going to be asking you for copies of records. When it comes to record keeping, you need to maintain all records for your tanks for the entire operational life of the tank. And that's an ongoing challenge we see with school districts. Again, when we talk about turnover within transportation or wherever the tanks are housed, as well as administration, who's in charge of the record keeping. Lastly, when it comes to, and this is where it applies with keeping you out of the hot seat. you can be inspected for two reasons: basic compliance with the rules, as well as a result of a complaint. And surprisingly, or you might be surprised to know that inspections have been conducted since the pandemic started. But the inspections may come from a direction or the result of something you're not prepared for. Let me give you an example. We had a school district in the College Station area, and they had an inspection from the state. And really how it came about was the vendor that was delivering fuel told them that you don't have all the necessary paperwork for me to deliver fuel. You need to get all that in order before I can dispense fuel in your tank. So not only did they have the business interruption issue of, oh, I can't get fuel now, but then also a couple of phone calls later, and they had someone from the state knocking on the door. Hey, just wanted to follow up on this. Not a fun situation I would want anyone to be involved in. So there's that. But then also, it's not just the TCEQ. Before the pandemic, they contracted out with third-party vendors because they didn't have enough inspectors in-house to conduct the inspections for them. And we actually saw licensed inspectors from, interestingly enough, the University of Texas at Arlington. They have a full-fledged compliance program related to fuel tanks, and they were actually going out and conducting inspections. And we heard about this through our school district. So there's that, but also your local fire department. They have the authority, because there are fire code standards that apply to flammable substances in large quantities. They have the authority to conduct inspections too. Historically, I know of 3 situations where, as a result of a complaint, the state fire marshal's office went out and conducted an inspection on rural school districts because they had a volunteer fire department only. They didn't have a local authority having jurisdiction, so it defaulted back to the state. They went out and conducted an inspection, wrote up a laundry list of items. Make a long story short, it was so far out of code, they ended up just having to have the tank replaced. So again, I don't want you in that situation. Next slide. So some other items that you need to be aware of, and then we'll wrap it up with fuel tanks. Staff training is really important. If you have an underground fuel tank, additional training requirements kicked in the mid 2010s, so 2015, and those were recently updated in 2018. So if you have an underground storage tank, I recommend you check out this link. It's related to operator training, and we can always talk more about that offline. Not only that, when it comes to staff training, your staff need to know how to respond to an incident on site. And this involves spill prevention, whether that be making sure they have the proper equipment or they have the proper training to respond to any sort of incident or emergency at your facility where your tanks are located. And then also tier 2 reporting. This is also a maybe. It depends on what you have and what the volume is and where exactly it's located. It may trigger tier 2 reporting also to the TCEQ, and they do conduct compliance inspections related to that. Okay, let's move on to the next topic. Haha, always related. So still talking about hazardous materials, but now we're changing directions and talking about a different set of regulations. Again, required. And that is hazard communication, or HAZCOM, like Janet mentioned when she introduced us. HAZCOM has always been in play. Let me just make that really clear. These rules have been in effect since 1984. So if I came to you and said, what does your hazard communication program look like? You should, or whoever the contact person is for your school district, be able to come back and say, oh, here's everything, here's the paperwork on it, this is what we do. Do you want to go out and take a look at some of our materials? Yes, yes, and yes. So this isn't a, okay, let's get that ball rolling. This is a, oh, we should have had a fully compliant and active program, because it's never a one and done, a long time ago. So if you don't have anything in place, we definitely need to make that a priority, because that was before the pandemic. And that involves all hazardous materials that we use on site. Now we're in a situation where we've got different staff, more expanded staff using disinfectants and chemicals, lots of different products, new equipment, new vendors we're working with. So now we just kind of went and blew everything up. If you didn't have a compliant program before, you're definitely going to be in a tenuous situation now. So this needs to be a priority because lots of state agencies are paying attention. Prior to the pandemic, the Texas Department of State Health Services had regulatory authority to come in and conduct routine inspections and also as a result of a complaint. But now, because we've got such a high volume of chemical and disinfectant use going on, and we've got complaints from employees starting to trickle in, questions from individuals starting to trickle in, we've got a lot more state agencies paying attention. We've got the TDA, we've also got the TCQ, and we've also got the EPA. Everybody's watching. So that means we have an opportunity for any of them to come in and conduct an inspection. As far as the points or the components of the hazard communication standard, and we'll go to the next slide real quick, and then I'll hand it off to Janet. You need to have a written program. So I'm talking about whether it's electronic form or on paper, you need to have a written documented program about how y'all comply with the requirements. The workplace chemical list, this is actually, interestingly enough, tied directly to your tier 2 reporting. You need to have a list of your hazardous materials and what their volumes are in case that triggers tier 2 reporting. Also, this is where we get into properly documented labels and safety data sheets and personal protective equipment provided to employees. It's important to note that safety data sheets and labels changed 2013 to 2015 when the hazard communication standard was aligned with a globally harmonized system of classification and labeling, or GHS. So if you've got products or containers that have had the same label since before 2015, it's probably non-compliant. Work with your vendors, your distributors, your retail folks to make sure you've got the proper labels and the proper accurate safety data sheets, and also training. Training for HazCom should be done initially upon employment if these individuals are using chemicals in their daily tasks. But then also, anytime you change the situation, have you brought in a new product lately? Have you changed anything about their task, how they use it, the frequency that they use it? Are they using new equipment related to it? You should also train them at that point. Anytime you flip the switch, you need to be training them on what you changed, okay? So this should be ongoing training for your employees that use chemicals readily and frequently. And as far as I'm concerned, during the pandemic, that's everybody. When you come in, when a state inspector, because we have a school district down in the valley currently, they're actually being inspected this week by the health department. They ask them for a copy of all these requirements and records of their past 5 years worth of training on hazard communication. Folks, the stress level was high with the school district. So again, let's not get in that hot seat. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Janet. Let's talk about bugs and pests.
Yeah. Thank you, Joni. So I'm going to park it right here for just a minute, because about what I'm about to say for IPM could be a rinse and repeat for a little bit of this. Let's see, develop a written IPM program, have a chemical list, you know, make sure you've got the right PPE, you've got labels and safety data sheets. Oh, and we're going to really talk about training. So you guys think we're a broken record? Really not. We're just sharing things that we have heard in the last 5 to 6 months, that if we can help you stay in compliance, this is what we're doing. So good morning again, everybody. Let's talk school IPM. Basics. Your district's supposed to have a board-approved IPM policy. Okay, you're supposed to be doing monitoring and making sure that you are doing preventive controls. When you're doing chemical applications, you should be using the lower risk pesticides. And for differentiations, when we talk integrated pest management, technically the Department of Ag is talking about insects, rodents, weeds, pests of man and structure, not so much on the cleaning and such. However, as the IPM coordinator and someone who understands pesticides, I am going to stress, just like Joni did, and I know that Shelley will do it too. You're the knowing person who understands a pesticide label and a safety data sheet. This is why people will come to you to ask you questions. All right, here's the biggie: record keeping. Record keeping, record keeping. Not only on your work orders, but your pest control use records in-house versus with your contractor. Pesticide applications made for incidental use, and then if you've got any pesticide complaints, you too, or the school nurse may be the ones that are finding out that the people who are doing some of this disinfecting and sanitizing are having problems, and they're filtering through the system of the district. Do kind of keep note of that. That way, even you and the school nurse, you, the IPM coordinator, and the school nurses can kind of have a good relationship. And then a plan for educating and informing school district employees about their roles in the IPM program. If you're not doing this, you will get dinged. Period, final. Written guidelines that identify thresholds for when pest control actions are justified. Where did I just hear about written plans? This is no different. And what's really interesting is some of the things that come up at districts, and this is why I can't make it cookie cutter for all the districts in the state, is if you're having a problem with feral hogs, that's not something, it's not just an IPM coordinator thing. That would be a district wide. But having a written plan of, well, if we get hogs on our athletic field versus hogs on the back 40 and nobody cares, well, what do we do? This would also include bats and some other odd pests. So the focus of most of today is going to be licensing, because it seems to be this is where everyone either gets confused, gets caught, or has problems. So who needs one? How do I get one? And what records do I need to keep? Those are the biggies. And the reason you need one is the rules are extremely static about this. If you are on school district property, and it's any educational institution, so the Department of Ag under the Occupation Health Code says that if you are a nursing home, a hospital, motel, hotel, lodge, apartment, educational institution, that's everything, K through 12, higher ed, private, public, childcare facility, or any other non-commercial entity like a government building, you are required to have some type of licensing to make applications. Why? This thing called the public. If somebody walks on your school property, your public property, and they are exposed to a chemical and you didn't tell them, they have the right to come to you and say, you didn't tell me and I got sick. So who regulates this? Well, we're in 2020. Once upon a time, it was the Department of Ag. Then they split in the 70s and went to the Structural Pest Control Board. And then in 2007, everything came back to the Department of Ag. And there are two divisions. There's multiple divisions within the Department of Ag. Don't get me wrong. But for our purposes today, there are two divisions. There is the agricultural pest control, and then there's structural pest control. Y'all, this is where you guys, I don't know where the wall starts, but it starts at this point. Understanding that when we say that you are licensed by TDA, doesn't matter if you've got an ag license or a structural license, you're still licensed by the Department of Ag. Okay, so You can't pull off and say, well, I don't know. Here it is. It's Department of Ag. When you go look up their rules, you will see under the Texas Administrative Code, and if you're not familiar with this, and I doubt many people are, because Joni and I know for sure, and Shelley, are a little whacked. We know what these rules are, and we've dug into them for various reasons. But under the TAC code for agriculture and for pesticides, you will see you've got, this is the ag side, this is the structural side. Understanding there is a law and there's a rule, and this is what guides everything. So let's start with what you guys have your first questions on. Well, I need to get a license, and or I've got an ag teacher that's got a license, or all right. Under the agricultural side, licensing is very in-depth. And on this side, you have private applicator. Private applicator says that I have a farm, a ranch, some type of agricultural commodity, and I am going to try and manage pests on said commodity. So if you've got an ag science teacher and they have got this license because they do that, then the only thing that they can use their private applicator license for is if they are teaching as part of the ag science program, and it is part of that instruction for that ag commodity. So for instance, if they were doing something on growing poinsettias because Christmas is coming up, and the poinsettias have got white flies, then that private applicator license would allow them to treat for the white flies. But this private applicator license does not allow them to go out on the athletic field and make a turf application. For that, you would need to get this lawn and ornamental plant and turf pest control license. Basically, when you get that license, it is called a 3A landscape maintenance license. Okay. Over on your left, you will see this yellow card. Reason I did this is you're going to notice the difference here in a minute. If you have a yellow card, if you were to call me up and say, Janet, I need to get CEUs and blah, blah, or something, ask me, I'm going to ask you to pull out that card and tell me, what color is it? Is it yellow or white? Because the distinction for someone like myself who works for Ag Extension, and or I work for the Department of Ag and I'm an inspector, is, well, then I know what this license, what this little piece of paper means. Because if I've got this yellow piece of paper, it means I can't come indoors and spray. It means I can only be outdoors in the landscape, or if I've got a 3B, I can be inside of a greenhouse. And we're talking about things of, doing weed control, fire ant control, anything from the exterior of the building to the edge of the property. That is what landscape maintenance licensing gets. Got it? Y'all can't shake your heads, but I got it. Well, I can make David Dillon's group shake their heads. Thank you, David. See, I still need, yay. See, Janet still needs people interaction. All right, moving indoors. Now, your school district administrator comes to you and says, well, we're tired of, waiting on the pest control contractor to come in and take care of stuff inside the building. Or we want you to take care of the mice, or we want you to take care of ants or roaches or whatever, or they're only doing our kitchens. Whatever it is, if they are asking you to come indoors to make a pest control application, you need, what did I say? Visuals here, you need the white one. Yes, this would be Janet, but this is my license. White means that I'm structural. Because I work for a non-governmental institution, I have the non-commercial political certified applicator license, which is this certified non-commercial applicator, because I work for a school district. Because I work for a school district, I don't need to be an apprentice. I don't need to be a technician. The Department of Ag, Dr. Renchie, and others before us said, look, schools are a little bit of a different situation. They're not going into people's homes. They're not doing certain things that put them at jeopardy. Therefore, we don't need them to go through this part of the training. All you've got to do is go through the 8 hours of the applicator training and then sit for the exams. And generally I tell everybody, especially because when I went and did this back in 03, I never recommend taking all 4 exams at the same time. You take your general and then you take your pest exam, because generally that's what you need. You need to be able to, general you've got to have in order to do any pest control. And then the category, which is pest, gets you inside the building. Now you'll notice I have L and W. Well, L is lawn and ornamental and W is weed. Basically, I can do everything with my license here that you could do back here, +1, because I can come in. It's a mixed bag of nuts, and I'll explain the mixed bag of nuts in a second. So how do you get this licensing? Well, you go see this man. This man is Dr. Don Renchie. He is our pesticide safety education coordinator. And no, he's not retiring anytime soon. He has said that he will stay with us for a little while, thank goodness, because I couldn't have taken both Merchant and Renchie going at the same time. But you go to his website, this is his website page, and then you go to the category trainings, and then you try and get here. And really what it will do is it will show you. You can go to this link as well, AgriLife Register. I'm going to tell you guys, if you don't have this one bookmarked, you should, only because this is where you would sign up at AgriLife Register, not only for Dr. Renchie's pesticide safety trainings, but also for anything that you have to do with school IPM or our IPM Experience House. This is our clearinghouse for all conference services. But if you go here, you'll get the training materials that you need for your license. You will also go through that 8-hour class. And again, his staff, Dr. Renchie's staff, if you contact them, if you hit this little home button, you'll go all the way to the bottom of their page. They've got their phone number. And yes, the staff is in that office. Are you kidding? Renchie couldn't shut down. This is too essential and too important. They will help you walk through your licensing, getting you licensed, what license you need. Trust me, they are a viable, valuable resource. All right, so here's where it gets ugly. Well, going back to that yellow license, okay, here's the caveat. If you get that non-commercial political subdivision license, you are allowed as that 3A license holder to have unlicensed people work under your license. The caveat is you better darn well train them. If you do not train them and you send them out to spray and something happens, it turns into a misapplication of a pesticide, and then it turns into a very substantial fine. So here's the things you need to remember. You as the 3A license holder, you must on an annual basis train those unlicensed employees using this form. You have a link right here that you can click on and go to. But it says, you, the licensed applicator, are training the unlicensed person. That unlicensed person prints their name here. And then for every product you want them to use, you must list it, the EPA registration number. The type of activity means, do you plan for them to backpack spray, push granular? What is the activity you are asking them to do? and then where. Playground, athletic field, fence rows, whatever. At the bottom, that unlicensed person again prints their name, signs it. You, the licensed person, print your name, you sign it, your address, telephone number, and then your applicator number. Now, granted, back in the day, this was that old paper that, had multiple things. Nowadays, you would just make a copy for the unlicensed person, and a copy in your records. And if you're not the IPM coordinator, you make darn sure the IPM coordinator has this. What do you got to cover? Laws and regs, pesticide safety, labels, PPE. So if you're going to have them put out a herbicide, they need to know that label for that particular herbicide. Is there any personal protective equipment? And again, everything must be retained for 2 years. You're going to understand this in a second. Any major questions on this one? Okay. All right. Because here's where it gets ugly and where I've got to make some defining things. So you can go down to your local whatever store and pick up this particular product, correct? And with this particular product, when you pick it up at the Home Depot, this is the label you get. Okay, it's very basic. Reason I'm bringing this up is, if you remember correctly, a few years back, there was an exposure incident. The gentleman got cancer. He sued Monsanto and won. And yet, when our state pesticide safety coordinator, Don Renchie, and myself had the side conversation and realized that this gentleman, worked for a school district, was supposedly trained, but drove around in pesticide contaminated clothing for 4 hours. What part of the label did he not follow? Therefore, reminding you all that if you're not training your unlicensed people and yourself, that there are problems with everything, then this is why we are stressing this. All right, because the product you just saw was, I bought it off the shelf. Now, I go to a pesticide distributor and I buy the same type of herbicide, but I buy this Roundup Pro. Well, this is a bigger difference because yes, there is the label that is attached to the product. Plus there is this label, which is considered the specimen label, that is 51 pages of a lot of information. This is what you're supposed to be training your folks about, okay? What is its active ingredient, okay? Then you look over here at your safety data sheet, and then you're looking at, well, what else is here? What else is in this? What's in this composition? Okay, so it's not just what is the active ingredients, but what are the inert ingredients. And when you start looking at some of the inerts, or what they refer to as just the other ingredients, you'll notice that there's petroleum distillates. There are other things that are cancer causing. Glyphosate may not be cancer causing, but what else is mixed with it could be. Therefore, that's why we want you to read the label and read the safety data sheet and train on it. Try not to beat it, y'all, but the other one is the paperwork. I know documentation seems like such a hassle, but y'all have got to realize, at this point in time, we've really got to make sure we're doing the right thing. So the Department of Ag says it doesn't matter if you've got the TDA 3A license and or you're a structural license, you're required to fill out all this stuff. Name and address, name of pesticides or devices used, especially on the structural side. Are you using anything like glue boards? Are you using snap traps? Are you using live traps? I mean, what else are you using? Total amount applied. How many did you put out? This includes devices. Okay, mixing rate of formulations. FYI, I want to go back to this label for just a second. If you're looking for mixing rate, if you have the real specimen label under the directions for use, it will tell you that same mixing rate formulation. 1 ounce to 1 gallon of water comes up with this formula, or is it only a half an ounce? So that you can make sure that you put the right rate over here. Target pest, give us something. Don't just say weeds, broadleaf weeds, grassy weeds, ants. No, I want fire ants, carpenter ants, odorous house ants. Date and time. Remember, because this goes with your posting and notification, service address, name and license number of person or persons receiving training, supervising, or applying pesticides or using pest control devices. And if it's a commercial business, they need the full business license. But if it's on school, if it's an in-house thing, then I want the licensed applicator and then anybody else. Okay, again, outdoor applications, remember wind direction, velocity, and outdoor temp. Finally, justification forms. If you're using a yellow or red category product, you need to make sure the description of the pest problem, justification for use, where is it going to go, name of pesticide, EPA registration number, check this box or check that box, and then make sure that the certified applicator, the person who applied the insecticide or the herbicide or the fungicide, signs this. Coordinator doesn't have to sign it unless it's a red category, but you do need to keep this with the application use record for at least 2 years. Finally, incidental use. This is only if you can, if it's for stinging and venomous, if it is an indoor treatment and you cannot post 48 hours in advance. So German cockroaches in a classroom is not an incidental use. Odorous house ants are not an incidental use. Typically, if you've got ants in a classroom, you can go in, vacuum them up, post, come back, and then treat, or probably do the treatment outdoors, clean up the food. So your requirement as a coordinator, need to make sure that you train them on the fact sheet. If it's not their primary duty, you've got to still train them, same training as if they were unlicensed under the 3A thing, and then make sure that you maintain the records and that they only use green or yellow category products. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to read this to anybody. If anybody wants this, we can get this on the school IPM website. What I do want to move to is this form. This form is on the school IPM website. Again, this would be done by, say it's the AC tech. And the reason you're letting them do incidental use is because every time they go change the filters, they probably run into a wasp or a yellow jacket nest or something like that. You give them a can of wasp killer. Okay, this is filled out by the applicator, kept with a coordinator, and you make sure, again, that it's not, you can't post 48 hours in advance and it's stinging or venomous insects. No weeds, rats, or ants. Finally, on ag barns, this is another big touch point. No mosquito misting systems. They've got to manage their manure. Make sure that they watch for food spillage, hay, all that other stuff, because y'all, these are where pest problems, and this is where you also get a lot of unlicensed pesticide applications being made because people just think, oh, this is not an area that IPM needs to watch over. It does. Again, because of the essence of time, Dr. Swagger has been so nice as to giving me some information on fly management. This is one we're going to just ship out to you guys, but I'm working on an IPM action plan for your ag barns that I'm hoping to get that done during the winter months if I can slow down ever. But it looks at how you slow down the fly life cycle. And because this is not something a cattle operator would normally do, but in an ag barn situation where you've got parents who are willing to spend the money on these fly predators, there are some great products out there that at some point I am happy to go into depth about what we can do for fly management for y'all. Finally, again, if you're not familiar with the school IPM website, schoolipm.tamu.edu, but you've got your audit checklist, you've got your posting, everything you need to know under this heading. It's under this coordinators tab. You'll see School IPM Coordinator Notebook. All of my forms, everything you need is here. You need a back newsletter, they're here. Sadly, yes, Tasby and I have no upcoming events, but we'll get some as soon as we know what we're doing in 2021. We promise. All right, Shelley.
Thank you, Janet. As Janet mentioned, we don't have any in-person training scheduled yet, but we are chomping at the bit to get out there. If you guys need any in-person trainings, reach out to me as far as asbestos, IPM, Janet and I, we can get something put together. But both of those, the asbestos and the IPM trainings, are now online, and you can take those at your own pace. So let's get into some very high level discussion about asbestos. We are not going to hit everything. We're going to hit the common boo-boos. That's what I like to call it. When I get phone calls, this is what I hear from you guys, where we've goofed. Janet, can I get the next slide? Okay, so what is asbestos? Well, it is a commercial name for a naturally occurring fibrous silicate mineral with outstanding physical properties, y'all. It is a remarkable and durable material. It doesn't break down. And that last statement is where our problems actually come from. The fibers don't break down, they are microscopic, and by us inhaling or ingesting them, we can get asbestos-related diseases such as mesothelioma, asbestosis, and cancer. Now, one of the things I think that a lot of people are still surprised to hear is, no, we don't mine asbestos in the United States anymore, but we still import the mineral in the product. The majority of it is used in highly industrial applications, but it's still out there. It's out and about. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about 3 regulations really quick. I'm just going to give you the high points of these regs, but I want you to be aware of them. Our federal regulation is the Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act, otherwise known as AHERA. Our state regulation, which is more stringent than our federal, is the Texas Asbestos Health Protection Rule, TAPR. Now, this regulation is where we get into having to have licensure, and we have sample requirements that we need to meet as well. Our third reg we don't hit on nearly as often. The first 2 I like to think of as your day-to-day bread and butter regulations that you need to be mindful as you're doing work. The third one, though, is the National Emissions Standard for Hazardous Air Pollutants. That's the NESHAP rules. These start to kick in when we're doing abatements, interior removals, and then outdoor removals of asbestos-containing materials. Next slide, please. All right, so what do we want to take away from these 3 big rules? Both of these rules, all 3 of these combined, are hundreds of pages of documents. But if I want you to leave with anything today to know about asbestos, a couple things about the federal regulation, AHERA. There has to be a trained person in a school district that implements the AHERA regulation. Every K through 12 public and private facility needs to implement and maintain an asbestos management plan. An asbestos management plan is not a, we designed one in 1988, we put it on the shelf, we're done with it. Because what it monitors is the building materials that you're taking in and moving out of your building. And you're going to do that on a day-to-day basis, essentially, if you're doing maintenance and operations activities. Next slide, please. Okay, our state regulation, I mentioned earlier, it's the strictest of the two regs. This is where we go into licensure. In the state of Texas, you need to be licensed or have additional certification to disturb asbestos-containing materials. And by disturb, I mean changing a ceiling tile, drilling a hole into a sheetrock wall. Texas also requires that you do a 10-day notification prior to any asbestos abatements or building demolitions. If you want to get some specific details on those 10-day notifications, please reach out to me. I'm not going to go into great detail just for the sake of time. Next slide. Okay, here's one thing. If you guys have kind of drifted out a little bit and are focused on other things, if you could hone back in right now and listen to this one thing. In the state of Texas, anything that's a suspect material and as a general rule, that's anything other than solid wood, metal, or glass, needs to either be sampled prior to it being disturbed, and you need at least 3 samples pulled by a licensed individual, or you can have an exclusion letter. Now, there's a big catch to these exclusion letters. So next slide, and let's talk about those. Okay, you can get 2 types of exclusion letters. They depend on whether they're compliant with this federal regulation, the HERA reg, or whether they're compliant with the TAPA regulation. Dollars to donuts, you will not very likely get an exclusion letter that's compliant with the TAPA regulation because it's a lot stricter and it puts the person who's writing the letter in a higher liability situation. This is one of the most confusing parts of both of these regulations since they have different requirements. Both of the regulations do require the exclusion letter to be signed and sealed by an accredited inspector or a licensed architect engineer. For both of these regulations, those contractor exclusion letters that you get with all your closeout documents, they don't mean anything as far as asbestos goes. You're really looking for something that is signed by an accredited inspector, a licensed architect or engineer. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's take a little time to look at what the difference is between a HERA compliant and a TAPA compliant exclusion letter. And why I'm focusing in on this particular issue is a lot of folks will go, I have an exclusion letter, I'm good. I don't need to worry about sampling. I have this letter that says, hey, to the best of my knowledge, there's no asbestos in the building. Unfortunately, that's not good enough. Because our HERA regulation, it's a really vague exclusion letter. It doesn't require a review of all the safety data sheets. The architect or engineer can use very vague language like, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think there's any asbestos. There may or may not be. I feel like there isn't. This letter will only help you out during an HERA inspection. And those are conducted by the Texas Department of State Health Services. And that's where they come in and say, hey, I want to look at your management plan. That's how you know you're doing an HERA inspection. You'll get this letter. This is what you see along with your contractor closeout documents all the time. This letter does not exempt you from sampling prior to disturbing suspect building materials, which is going to be highly likely with your facility maintenance. So if you have a letter, an exclusion letter in your closeout documents, or you got one when you got a new building, more than likely it is this a HERA type of exclusion letter. It will not get you out of jail as far as sampling goes. Let's talk about the other type of exclusion letter. Janet, if you could give me the next slide. So here's where we all get in a little bit of trouble because our state regulation is way more stringent with exclusion letters. Our architect, accredited inspector, or licensed engineer needs to review all the safety data sheets for every single building material that went into that facility and certify that none of those products contain asbestos. And therefore the building materials do not contain asbestos. And they really want to see that type of language. So you have to have that very clear confirming language in a TAPA exclusion letter and all the safety data sheets. I've done this for about 12 years and I've seen one TAPA compliant exclusion letter, and I could really argue that it wasn't. Somebody tried to make one. Let's put it that way. More often than not, you're just not going to get this type of compliant level because it puts the person who's writing it on the hook because they're really saying, hey, there's no asbestos in the building. I'm a licensed inspector and management planner. I may sample your entire building, but I'm probably never going to say there's no asbestos in your building unless I can tear apart the whole entire thing and get a sample of all suspect materials. I'm going to say things such as the materials that we sampled are not asbestos containing. So only this type of letter, this very confirmative, there's no asbestos in the building, and all the safety data sheets will get you out of pulling at least 3 samples in the state of Texas prior to disturbing a building material. All right, Janet, let's go to the next slide. So in summary, your AHERA compliant exclusion letters are only valid until a building material is disturbed. Disturbing a building material is highly likely when you're doing maintenance and operation activities. A TAPA exclusion letter can be used in lieu of sampling, but they're generally very difficult to obtain, and you need to have all the safety data sheets along with that letter. We generally recommend that sampling is the most reliable way to determine the asbestos status of a building material. Next slide, please. Okay, so who is inspecting? It's the Texas Department of State Health Services. They are out there right now doing AHERA and TAPA inspections. What's the difference? AHERA are the most common types of inspections. That's when you get a letter, usually they fax it saying, hey, we're going to be coming out on XYZ date to look at your asbestos management plan and your asbestos contained materials. AHERA inspections, they will generally give you a 5 business day notice. And this is where they're going to go in and look at the management plan. Most common. Is there a cycle for these inspections? Yes and no. Every district is supposed to get one every 3 years. Does that happen? No. They tend to focus in certain areas with certain districts. Some of you may never experienced an AHERA inspection. Does not mean that they're not coming. The next type of inspection is based on the TAPA regulation. This is where the inspector will just show up. They'll show up at the work site where it's going on. How do they know what the work site is? Well, a little while ago, we talked about a 10-day notification. You're going to submit that, or your contractor or your abatement consultant. That's going to be the red light for them to come out and visit you. They will also do either one of these inspections based on a complaint. They're regulatory required to come out and visit you. And if they come out to do a TAPA inspection because they think there's some illegal activity going on, as far as you're not dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's as far as the abatement process goes, they will go in and look at your asbestos management plan. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of districts who have everybody in, they did their 10-day notification, the abatement's going great, the inspector came out, found a few little things that they didn't like about the abatement process, and then went and said, can I look at your asbestos management plan? And that's where the district got in a heap of trouble from. So summary here, two types of inspections. AHERA, they will notify you. TAPA, they'll just show up. They'll show up on the building site. If they've got problems or questions, then they'll reach out and contact the asbestos designated person. These are all done by the Texas Department of State Health Services, and they have inspectors in every region in the state of Texas, and they are out and about right now, y'all. All right, Janet, next slide. So I have gotten on my soapbox about asbestos, but your buildings are unfortunately going to have other hazardous materials that you may need to deal with prior to doing renovations or demolitions. Think about lead, mercury, polychlorinated biphenyls. All of these need to be properly removed or recycled prior to you doing a demolition or a renovation. Often we're seeing a lot of landfills that do accept construction waste asking for documentation that shows that your lead levels are below a certain threshold. So we're seeing more and more construction waste getting turned away because we can't document the hazardous material status. I think that is about all I have to say about asbestos. I went a little over time there, you guys. I could talk 8 to 10 hours off the cuff about asbestos, unfortunately. Anybody have any questions on all of the topics that we covered? Y'all
I was going to say, we did get one in chat that I'll go ahead and mention, and that'll give anyone else an opportunity to post a question in chat in case they do have one. Early on, Scott Simmons asked about fuel tanks, about what if they don't own the tanks, however they're on their property, what sort of, and it's a common arrangement, where does the line go? And my response to him was essentially, because it's on your property, you have a right and a responsibility to make sure that it's fully compliant, because it's on your property, you're going to get inspected potentially, they're going to follow up on a complaint on your property, and they will shut that down if it's not in compliance. So, you're at complete risk of business interruption. Maybe you won't be issued any sort of fines or penalties, but you're definitely in the chain of operations and you will be impacted. So that was a really good question, I thought.
Hey to Scott.
No other questions. So I guess we can wrap it up.
You can always reach out to us. There's our contact information. And other than that, happy Thanksgiving to
y'all.
Okay, we'll see you guys in December. That will be fun. I just realized I'll be recording from Abilene. But it's okay.
I hear it's lovely that time of year.
Yeah.
All right. Take care, everyone.